Most men believe attraction is about looks, money, or confidence. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If attraction were about trying harder, desperate men would be irresistible. They're not. The men people remember, the men women feel drawn to without understanding why. They're not louder, they're not chasing, they're rooted. And today, we're going to talk about how you become that man. Not by pretending, not by impressing, but by shifting who you are at the core. Self control is one of the most misunderstood traits in attraction because it is quiet. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't demand applause. And because of that, many people mistake it for weakness or passivity. In reality, self control is a form of power that doesn't need to be proven. A man who can regulate his emotions, his reactions, and his impulses sends a subtle but unmistakable signal. He is not ruled by external validation. He does not collapse under rejection, inflate under praise, or spiral when things don't go his way. That emotional steadiness creates a sense of depth, and depth is far more compelling than noise. Attention seeking, on the other hand, is loud because it is rooted in insecurity. It says, look at me, choose me, reassure me. Even when it shows up as confidence, it carries an undercurrent of urgency. The need to be seen, liked, or desired immediately puts other people in a position of power. Self control reverses that dynamic. A man who doesn't rush to fill silence, doesn't over explain himself, and doesn't chase reactions creates space. In that space, curiosity grows. People start leaning in, not because he's pulling them, but because he isn't pushing himself forward. There is something deeply attractive about a man who can pause instead of react. When he's provoked and chooses restraint, when he's interested but doesn't lose his composure, when he's disappointed but doesn't become bitter, it shows emotional maturity. This kind of restraint isn't repression, it's awareness. He feels deeply, but he chooses wisely. That choice communicates safety. And safety is the foundation of real attraction because people are drawn to those who feel predictable in their values, not chaotic in their emotions. Self control also reflects self respect. A man who doesn't beg for attention is a man who believes his presence already has value. He doesn't need to convince anyone of his worth because he has already decided it for himself. That internal decision changes how he speaks, how he listens, and how he moves through the world. His tone is calm. His actions are intentional. His interest is selective. And selectivity is magnetic because it implies standards, and standards imply confidence rooted in identity rather than performance. Attention seeking often masquerades as passion or boldness, but it usually exhausts both the person expressing it and the people receiving it. Constant pursuit, constant reassurance, constant emotional output leaves no room for desire to breathe. Self-control introduces rhythm. It allows moments of presence and moments of distance. It understands that attraction grows when there is balance, when energy is exchanged rather than poured out unevenly, when interest is shown without desperation and care is offered without control. A man with self-control doesn't disappear, but he also doesn't overextend. He knows when to speak and when silence carries more weight. He understands that mystery isn't created by games, but by fullness. His life doesn't revolve around being wanted. So when he shows interest, it feels intentional rather than needy. That contrast is what makes people feel chosen rather than chased, valued rather than used, drawn rather than pressured. Purpose is one of the most quietly powerful forces in attraction because it gives a man weight, not loud weight, not performative ambition, but an inner gravity that pulls attention without asking for it. A man with purpose moves differently through the world. His decisions are guided, not reactive. His energy is directed, not scattered. He isn't constantly looking around for something to fill him because he already knows what he's building toward. That sense of direction creates stability, and stability is deeply attractive because it signals that he can stand on his own, emotionally and mentally, without leaning on others for meaning. When a man lacks purpose, his attention tends to drift toward people as substitutes for fulfillment. He chases connection to escape emptiness, validation to mask uncertainty, and excitement to avoid stillness. That restless energy is felt immediately. Purpose changes that dynamic entirely. A man with a clear sense of why he wakes up in the morning doesn't cling to anyone to feel alive. He brings fullness into interactions rather than hunger. Conversations with him feel grounded because his identity isn't being negotiated in real time. He knows who he is becoming, and that certainty makes others feel oriented in his presence. Purpose also creates natural boundaries. A man who is committed to something meaningful doesn't bend himself into shapes that don't fit just to be liked. His time has value because it is invested with intention. He chooses where his energy goes, and that selectivity communicates self-respect without explanation. People instinctively respect those who respect their own path. There is something compelling about a man who can say no without resentment, who can walk away without bitterness, and who doesn't confuse attention with progress. His purpose anchors him, and that anchor keeps him steady even when external circumstances shift. What makes purpose magnetic is not the goal itself, but the internal alignment it creates. Whether his mission is creative, professional, personal, or philosophical, it organizes his inner world. His actions make sense. His discipline has meaning. His sacrifices feel intentional rather than forced. That coherence is felt by others as calm confidence. He doesn't need to dominate a room because his presence already has structure. He doesn't need to impress because his life speaks for him. Purpose gives his masculinity depth, turning effort into direction and ambition into character. A man driven by purpose also becomes emotionally safer to be around. He is less volatile, less needy, less reactive because his self-worth is not negotiated through approval. Setbacks don't shatter him, and success doesn't inflate him beyond recognition. His emotional consistency creates trust. People are drawn to those they can rely on, those whose mood doesn't depend on how much attention they're getting in the moment. Purpose gives him that consistency by rooting his sense of self in something larger than immediate gratification. Magnetism isn't created by trying to attract. It's created by being absorbed in something meaningful enough that attraction becomes a byproduct. When a man is deeply engaged with his purpose, he stops performing and starts inhabiting his life. That authenticity is felt instantly. People sense when someone is moving towards something real, and they are naturally drawn to the clarity, the calm, and the quiet conviction that comes from knowing where you're going and why. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls, as acts of distance or rejection, but in reality, they are signals of self-knowledge. A man who has boundaries understands where he ends and where others begin. He knows what he will accept, what he will tolerate, and what he will walk away from without resentment. That clarity is rare, and rarity creates value. Desire grows in environments where access is not automatic, where presence is intentional, and where connection feels chosen rather than assumed. Boundaries quietly communicate that a man values himself enough to protect his time, his energy, and his emotional space. When boundaries are absent, availability becomes constant, and constant availability erodes attraction. If someone can reach you at any moment, have unlimited access to your attention, and cross your limits without consequence, there is nothing to discover, nothing to earn, and nothing to miss. Boundaries introduce rhythm into interaction. They create moments of closeness and moments of space. That space allows desire to breathe, because longing is born in absence, not in saturation. A man who is not always accessible becomes intriguing, not because he is playing games, but because his life has structure and priority beyond being wanted. Boundaries also change power dynamics in subtle ways. A man who can say no calmly without over explaining or apologizing demonstrates emotional independence. He is not negotiating his worth through compliance. He doesn't fear losing someone simply because he honors himself. That self trust shifts the dynamic from seeking approval to offering presence. People are drawn to those who choose rather than chase because choice implies abundance. Boundaries signal that connection with him is optional but meaningful, and that contrast creates desire rooted in respect rather than obligation. There is also a sense of safety that boundaries provide. When a man enforces his limits consistently, others know where they stand with him. His reactions are predictable, not erratic. He doesn't explode from suppressed resentment or withdraw without explanation. His boundaries make his behavior legible. That emotional clarity allows attraction to deepen because uncertainty is no longer about instability, but about depth. People feel free to explore connection when they know it exists within a container of respect and self control. Boundaries are not about withholding affection or becoming distant. They are about intentional engagement. A man with boundaries can be warm without being consumed, open without being porous, and generous without self abandonment. His interest feels grounded because it is not driven by fear of loss. He doesn't rush intimacy or force closeness. He allows relationships to unfold at a pace that honors both himself and the other person. That patience adds weight to every interaction, making attention feel earned rather than cheapened. Desire thrives when there is tension between closeness and independence. Boundaries maintain that tension by preserving individuality within connection. A man who maintains his identity while relating to others becomes someone people want to move toward, not because he demands it, but because he doesn't disappear into them. His presence remains distinct, his values intact, and his life self-directed. That sense of separateness within intimacy is what keeps attraction alive, because desire is fueled not by possession, but by the ongoing choice to reach towards someone who stands firmly in their own center. Loud confidence often gets mistaken for strength because it announces itself boldly. It takes up space, dominates conversations, and demands recognition. But beneath that volume, it is frequently fragile, dependent on reaction and reinforcement. Emotional safety, by contrast, is quiet and grounding. It doesn't need to prove anything. A man who offers emotional safety creates an atmosphere where others can relax instead of perform, where they don't feel evaluated, rushed, or overwhelmed. That sense of ease is profoundly attractive because it allows people to show up as they are without fear of judgment or instability. Emotional safety is built through consistency. A man who responds rather than reacts, who listens without interrupting, and who doesn't weaponize vulnerability creates trust over time. His presence feels steady because his emotions are regulated, not suppressed or explosive. He doesn't disappear when things get uncomfortable, nor does he escalate tension to protect his ego. That steadiness communicates maturity. People instinctively gravitate toward those who feel emotionally predictable, not because they are boring, but because predictability in values creates a foundation for deeper connection. Where loud confidence seeks attention, emotional safety offers reassurance. A man who doesn't need to dominate a room leaves space for others to speak, think, and breathe. He doesn't turn every interaction into a competition or a performance. His confidence is internal, expressed through patience, curiosity, and self-restraint. That makes others feel seen rather than overshadowed. Being around him feels like relief because there is no pressure to impress or keep up. Attraction grows in environments where people feel understood rather than evaluated. Emotional safety also reveals itself in how a man handles conflict. Instead of becoming defensive, dismissive, or aggressive, he stays present. He can acknowledge discomfort without collapsing or attacking. He doesn't confuse disagreement with disrespect. That ability to tolerate emotional intensity without losing control makes him feel reliable. People feel safer investing emotionally when they know their feelings won't be minimized, mocked, or used against them. This reliability is far more seductive than bravado because it suggests long-term stability rather than short-term excitement. Another element of emotional safety is accountability. A man who can admit when he's wrong, reflect on his behavior, and make adjustments without shame or ego creates an environment of mutual respect. Loud confidence often avoids this because it is tied to image. Emotional safety isn't threatened by imperfection. It allows room for growth, mistakes, and repair. That openness deepens intimacy because it removes the fear of rupture. People are drawn to those who can repair connection, not just initiate it. What makes emotional safety so compelling is that it allows desire to deepen rather than spike and disappear. Loud confidence can be stimulating at first, but it often burns out because it relies on intensity. Emotional safety sustains attraction because it provides a secure base. A man who makes others feel emotionally held without controlling or consuming them becomes someone they want to return to. His presence feels like grounding rather than chaos, clarity rather than confusion, and calm rather than constant stimulation. Masculinity is often framed as something to display, something to prove through dominance, volume, or constant action. This turns it into a performance, a role that must be maintained through effort and visibility. Presence is different. Presence doesn't ask to be seen, it is felt. A man who is present is rooted in his body, his values, and the moment he occupies. He doesn't rush to fill silence or assert himself unnecessarily. His masculinity is not dependent on how others react to him, which gives it a natural authority that cannot be rehearsed or faked. Performance relies on external validation. It needs witnesses, feedback, and confirmation to survive. Presence exists regardless of audience. A man grounded in presence is comfortable being still, listening deeply, and allowing moments to unfold without control. This stillness creates weight. When he speaks, his words land because they come from intention rather than impulse. When he acts, it feels deliberate rather than reactive. That deliberateness is felt as strength because true strength doesn't scramble for attention or rush to prove itself. Presence also shows in how a man handles uncertainty. Instead of posturing or exaggerating certainty, he tolerates not knowing. He doesn't mask insecurity with bravado or hide discomfort behind jokes or aggression. He stays with the moment, even when it's uncomfortable. That emotional groundedness communicates self-trust. Others sense that he can hold complexity without collapsing or dominating, which makes his masculinity feel mature rather than performative. It's not about having all the answers, but about being steady while seeking them. When masculinity becomes performance, relationships turn transactional. Energy is spent on impression management rather than connection. Presence shifts the focus inward. A man who is present isn't trying to be impressive. He's trying to be honest. His attention is undivided. He notices subtleties, listens beyond words, and responds with awareness. This depth of attention makes people feel recognized rather than evaluated. Attraction grows not from spectacle, but from the feeling of being genuinely met. Presence also creates emotional containment. A present man doesn't leak his anxiety into the environment or demand others regulate his emotions. He manages his inner state with responsibility. This containment creates safety because people know they won't be pulled into chaos or drama. His calm becomes an anchor. That anchoring effect is deeply masculine, not because it dominates, but because it stabilizes. It allows others to relax into themselves rather than brace against unpredictability. Masculinity rooted in presence endures because it doesn't depend on circumstances. Performance collapses when it's challenged or ignored. Presence remains intact. A man who embodies presence carries himself with quiet certainty. His identity isn't fractured by comparison, rejection, or competition. He doesn't need to outshine anyone to feel secure. His masculinity is expressed through how fully he inhabits himself and the space around him, through the grounded way he listens, moves, and responds to the world without needing to announce who he is. Masculinity is often framed as something to display, something to prove through dominance, volume, or constant action. This turns it into a performance, a role that must be maintained through effort and visibility. Presence is different. Presence doesn't ask to be seen, it is felt. A man who is present is rooted in his body, his values, and the moment he occupies. He doesn't rush to fill silence or assert himself unnecessarily. His masculinity is not dependent on how others react to him, which gives it a natural authority that cannot be rehearsed or faked. Performance relies on external validation. It needs witnesses, feedback, and confirmation to survive. Presence exists regardless of audience. A man grounded in presence is comfortable being still, listening deeply, and allowing moments to unfold without control. This stillness creates weight. When he speaks, his words land because they come from intention rather than impulse. When he acts, it feels deliberate rather than reactive. That deliberateness is felt as strength because true strength doesn't scramble for attention or rush to prove itself. Presence also shows in how a man handles uncertainty. Instead of posturing or exaggerating certainty, he tolerates not knowing. He doesn't mask insecurity with bravado or hide discomfort behind jokes or aggression. He stays with the moment, even when it's uncomfortable. That emotional groundedness communicates self-trust. Others sense that he can hold complexity without collapsing or dominating, which makes his masculinity feel mature rather than performative. It's not about having all the answers, but about being steady while seeking them. When masculinity becomes performance, relationships turn transactional. Energy is spent on impression management rather than connection. Presence shifts the focus inward. A man who is present isn't trying to be impressive, he's trying to be honest. His attention is undivided. He notices subtleties, listens beyond words, and responds with awareness. This depth of attention makes people feel recognized rather than evaluated. Attraction grows not from spectacle, but from the feeling of being genuinely met. Presence also creates emotional containment. A present man doesn't leak his anxiety into the environment or demand others regulate his emotions. He manages his inner state with responsibility. This containment creates safety because people know they won't be pulled into chaos or drama. His calm becomes an anchor. That anchoring effect is deeply masculine, not because it dominates, but because it stabilizes. It allows others to relax into themselves rather than brace against unpredictability. Masculinity, rooted in presence, endures because it doesn't depend on circumstances. Performance collapses when it's challenged or ignored. Presence remains intact. A man who embodies presence carries himself with quiet certainty. His identity isn't fractured by comparison, rejection, or competition. He doesn't need to outshine anyone to feel secure. His masculinity is expressed through how fully he inhabits himself and the space around him, through the grounded way he listens, moves, and responds to the world without needing to announce who he is. Impressing is rooted in effort, in the subtle anxiety of trying to be chosen. It is performative by nature, shaped around anticipation of how one will be perceived. When a man focuses on impressing, his attention moves outward, scanning for approval, adjusting himself to fit what he believes will be admired. Invitation works in the opposite direction. It comes from inner alignment rather than outward display. A man who invites is not trying to sell himself. He is simply open to connection from a place of self-assuredness. That openness feels calm, not urgent, and calm creates space for genuine attraction. Invitation is about presence without pressure. When a man invites, he offers his attention, his time, and his energy without demanding a response. There is no hidden transaction, no expectation that interest must be immediately returned. This lack of pressure is deeply disarming. People feel free around someone who is not trying to extract validation from them. They can explore connection at their own pace, which paradoxically makes them more inclined to move closer. Desire thrives when it is not coerced, when it arises from choice rather than obligation. A man who invites also communicates confidence in abundance. He is not afraid of rejection because rejection does not threaten his sense of self. His worth is not dependent on being wanted by everyone. This detachment is not indifference, it is grounded self-respect. He shows interest when it is genuine, and he withdraws when it is not reciprocated, without resentment or dramatization. That emotional clarity makes his presence feel clean and honest. There is nothing manipulative or performative about it, which makes connection feel real rather than staged. Invitation changes the dynamic of interaction. Instead of chasing attention, a man creates an environment others want to step into. His life has substance, rhythm, and direction. He is engaged in something meaningful enough that connection becomes an addition, not a replacement. This fullness is felt immediately. People sense when they are being welcomed into a life rather than asked to fill a void. That distinction is powerful because it allows attraction to be rooted in mutual interest instead of emotional dependency. Impressing often collapses under time because it requires constant maintenance. There is always another standard to meet, another image to uphold. Invitation is sustainable because it is honest. A man who invites shows up as he is, not as who he thinks he needs to be. This authenticity creates trust. People are drawn to those who feel real, whose words and actions align, whose presence does not shift depending on the audience. Trust deepens attraction by making it safe to invest emotionally.